Serious people who have witnessed someone's death but didn't know until later. What is your story? I drove my friend down to the train station so he could go home. Little did I know in less than 10 minutes he would jump in front of that train. Damn, I miss him. Was skiing with my daughter. It was a bad winter with little snow. The side of the run was littered with rocks normally covered in snow. As I looked up the run, a guy cartwheeled over the top through the rocks. This was before helmets. I took off my equipment and ran up the hill. The guy ended in the snow and was sliding down the hill. I dug my feet in to prevent his slide and yelled for my daughter to get the ski patrol. They arrived about 10 minutes later and relieved me, and I went on my way. Later we saw the ambulance sitting in the parking lot. We learned later they were trying to stabilize the guy before transport. The next day I read he passed in the parking lot in the paper. When I was much younger at a judo grading, I saw a lad 5 or 6 years older than me perform a legal throw te guruma in an illegal way. It resulted in his opponent landing shoulders down and forehead also down, snapping his opponent's neck. He also drove through the throw, which you are not meant to do with te guruma. I, being about 8 or 9 years old, just thought the lad was unconscious. It was only later on that I realized what had really happened. Te guruma is now completely illegal in competition and forms part of the kinchi waza forbidden techniques. The throw has a history of injuring judokas when performed carelessly. I was surfing with a buddy at a beach in Maine a few years ago. A hurricane had just passed some distance offshore and the swell was breaking head high, which for Maine is really big surf. My buddy was a local, and while we were sitting out past the break, a guy swam up to us. He was another local who knew my friend. They said hello and he continued swimming on. My friend tells me that this guy swims up and down the length of the beach every single day, year-round. He was older, in his early 60s. So it was a pretty impressive feat. This guy would do the same swim every day in the winter too. Anyways, I was impressed. An hour later we hear some yelling and my buddy's cousin, who was sitting on the beach, runs down to the water and we watched as he dragged a lifeless body up onto the beach. We paddled in as fast as we could. When we got there, I saw that it was the guy who swam by and said hello. One person was doing chest compressions on him while the another was doing rescue breaths. Paramedics arrived after about 10 minutes and took over. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. A couple weeks later we found out that an autopsy revealed he had broken his neck and then subsequently drowned. The theory is that he was attempting to come into shore and either tried to ride a wave or got picked up by a large wave and smashed into the sand head first. I think about this day a lot. Side note: in the middle of all of this, his wife came out onto the beach to see why a crowd had gathered. I'll never forget her face or the scream that she let out when she saw that it was her husband of 40 years lying there on the beach. My neighbor died a few months ago. Their patio is under my balcony. I went out to my balcony and heard her partner on the phone with a 911 operator. It was really early and I was half asleep, so I didn't really know what was going on, but heard sirens shortly after and figured she was taken by ambulance. I went about my business. But then a couple of hours later, I left to take my kids to school and see forensics, and police vans everywhere, so I figured she must have died at the hospital. No. I went back out onto the balcony when I got back and it was quiet. I just happened to look down and she was there lying dead on the ground. She had been there the whole time. And I had been in and out several times by then and she was under me and I didn't even know it. They didn't cover her with a sheet or anything. I still can't step into my balcony without picturing her lying there. I went to a bike trail in the woods. Saw a guy without a helmet biking pretty hard with his friends. At one point in the trail I came across him and his friends. He was face down in a pool of blood and his head was a little misshapen. I didn't realize until while I was leaving the ambulance was there with who I assume were the parents. I was told he fell off his bike at a high speed. Hit a tree so hard he broke his skull into pieces. One time I was taking my dog to the vet and walked by a kid. Maybe 11 years old. Lying on the sidewalk. I thought he was messing around. Turned out he had jumped from the balcony of his home. And he was very much dead. It came out on the news. And he actually went to the same school as my sister. I was lining up to get on a shuttle home from a very large and popular music festival a few years ago and noticed a girl flat on the ground a few yards away with a couple friends standing/squatting around her. From what I could tell at that point, she was responsive and talking. My immediate thought was that she needed help, but none of her friends seemed overly concerned at first. Just kept handing her water. I did hear sirens in the distance, but that wasn't uncommon for the area/festival. Because of how long the shuttle line was, I ended up watching as this girl started to violently seize on the ground about 5 to 10 minutes before EMTs got to her. When I boarded the shuttle shortly thereafter, she was still lying on the ground. I ended up Googling the festival a few days later and a news story came up describing how a woman had passed away. The details and photo they shared made it obvious to me that it was the same person I'd seen. And it made me feel very sad for her. My sister and I were at the neighborhood pool with friends one summer. They had a regular pool and one of those mini 1-foot-deep pools for toddlers. It got too busy and they kept shutting down the main pool for adult swim, so we bailed. As we were all leaving, I saw a little boy repeatedly doing belly flops into the kiddie pool. Didn't think anything of it since his mom was laying there and appeared to be watching. They shut down the pool area a few days later, and when it opened, you couldn't go to the pool without an adult. We were all between 7 and 10 and were strong swimmers, so it felt ridiculous. Years later it came up that the little boy I saw bumped his head on the side of the pool and breathed in too much water. I have no idea if it was one of those dry drowning cases you hear about these days. But he ended up passing a few days later. Our parents never mentioned it because they didn't want to scare us. But I would have preferred knowing, because we could have taken precautions ourselves or helped others. I did a lot of reckless things in the pool that I probably would have thought twice about had I known it was possible to drown like that. For some reason I didn't think it was possible to drown in shallow waters. When I was young, 7 or 8, I was on summer break and visited Poland. I was playing with my great-grandmother, and when it got late, I said good night and I love you. When I wake up, she is gone. She was on the other side of the wall. Didn't realize she died until years later. I didn't really know her well, which in my mind makes it even sadder. Went to this house party. It was pretty big with over 100 people easy. It started during the afternoon and was still going strong when my friends and I got there about sundown. As we walked up the drive, we saw this dude lying in the grass. We all just thought he had partied too hard and was sleeping it off. A few hours later we heard a commotion and heard yelling. It was someone trying to wake and then do CPR on the sleeping dude, who had in fact died of alcohol poisoning and had probably been dead for hours. It was about my grandpa. He was really sick. We were at the hospital and I was the only one in the room. He told me, "How are you?" and I said, "Why, the smile just being around you makes me happy." And then he told me to get him. When I left the room, I saw some doctors enters the room. I thought they entered the room to give him some medicines. When I came back with the water, I saw my mom crying in the hallway and I told her what's wrong, and she told me, "Your grandfather died." And I was shocked. A moment ago I was talking to him and suddenly he died.